Chord melody is one of the most beautiful and fun ways to play jazz guitar. You're playing the whole song, melody, harmony and rhythm all at once. But most students try to learn this by reading difficult arrangements written by others, and that is a dead end. If you want to learn chord melody and have fun playing songs in that way, then you need a different strategy, one that actually works. Let me help you fix some common mistakes and in the process show you a better approach by creating a chord melody arrangement. Now the first part is pretty simple, but it's almost never how students try to learn chord melody. And that's probably because it's very easy to find transcriptions of beautiful arrangements, either in books or online lessons, and I also post a transcription and a video every week on my Patreon page, which by now has 300 of them. But while learning from transcriptions can be very useful, it's only if you do it the right way. Most jazz guitar students start with a final product, a complex arrangement, rather than building the skills needed to actually play it. Let me show you what to do instead so that you have something that you can play. Because playing chord melody should not be the same as learning a piece of classical music. The goal is to play your version of the song with melody and chords together. And the worst thing you can do is start by trying to sight read a very complicated arrangement that somebody else wrote. That is very difficult and probably the reason most people give up in frustration. Now, if you zoom out a bit and think about what your goal is, then it actually becomes easier. Here's a step-by-step process that actually works, starting with the most important foundation. The goal is to play a song, and the most important part of any song is the melody. In fact, the melody is the song. We change the chords all the time in jazz, but the melody stays the same, and that is what people recognize. So the first thing you need to do is to learn the melody and really know it well, because you want to be able to move it around the neck once we start adding chords under it. For this video, I'll use the first part of All the Things You Are to walk you through the process and try to really listen to what the melody sounds like. This is what ties everything together, so this is where you want to start. Not with a difficult and heavily embellished arrangement, just the melody. Playing the melody helps you hear how the song should sound in time, figure out the phrasing that fits, and it also sets you up for the next important ingredient. Now that you know the melody, it's also a good idea to just play through the chords. Doing so might even sort out parts of the chord melody arrangement, but the main goal here is really just to internalize the sound of the harmony. You start to hear how the melody and the chords fit together, and you'll probably realize if there are chords that you don't know and need to study or figure out, or if there's something that you don't like. Playing the chords in time helps with hearing the rhythm, figuring out where the harmony is busy or where something important happens. But there's another decision you also need to make. Another important thing to keep in mind is what you want to end up with. That's one of the reasons that I'm using All the Things You Are. There are so many great versions in different tempos of this song. You might hear it in a medium swing like this Chet Baker version. Or you might prefer something that's a lot faster, like this Pat Metheny trio take. The tempo you choose makes a big difference. At a slower tempo you have more space for things like passing chords and fills, but if you try that in a fast version, it can sound messy and crowded, and that's why you want to think about the feel and the tempo early on. It will shape the decisions you make as you build your chord melody. And this brings us to another important point: the process you use to create the arrangement. When you're learning to solo on a new song, you don't start with complex lines and substitutions. You begin with clear, basic phrases. That helps you internalize the song, the form, and the harmony. And then later you can start adding more interesting rhythms, chromatic notes, and colors. It is the same for chord melody. You also want to start with a very simple version, just the melody and the most basic harmony underneath it. If it's easy to play, you can focus on phrasing the melody and keeping good time, which is just as important for the music as the harmony is. And that gives you a solid foundation. And once you have that, you'll start hearing spots where you can add more, extra harmony, fills, counterpoint, all the fun stuff. A great place to begin is just adding a bass note under the melody. For All the Things You Are, could sound something like this in the first few bars. This approach is so simple that you can still phrase the melody freely and make it sound natural and not mechanical, because it still has to be music. From here you can start figuring out how to fit full chords into the arrangement. The way that you add harmony to the melody in this video is by playing the melody high and adding a chord under it. And that's why it helps to keep the melody mostly on the 2 top strings, only going to the 3rd string as an exception here and there. Now for All the Things You Are, that means that the first melody note, A flat, fits perfectly into this F minor voicing. The next melody note, the D flat, can be harmonized with this B flat minor chord. But you could also use this wider voicing, which is a bit more difficult. But I'll return to that later when we need it. On the E flat 7, we have the G that could be harmonized like this. And then I use a drop 2 on the top string set for A flat major 7, but I'm playing first the lower 3 notes and then adding in the melody on the high E. The D flat major 7 is essentially the same voicing as this, just on another string set. Then another drop 2 for the G7. Again, 3 notes and then adding the 4th as a melody. And here you could also use a wider voicing, like this, but that's a bit more stretchy. And then of course it resolves to the C major 7. I'll return to the alternative voicings later. Now you have this arrangement. The important thing is to make sure that this version feels easy to play for you before you start adding extra stuff like passing chords, fills and counter melodies. Now let's look at some of the things that you can add once you're comfortable with the melody and the chords. And there's one really important thing to keep in mind as you start expanding your arrangement. A lot of things are pretty easy to add to All the Things You Are once you have a solid basic version. And it is at this stage that you can start using transcriptions of arrangements and incorporate ideas from those into your chord melody. This example uses passing chords and inner voice movement to make the arrangement flow and adds a bit of energy. I really like that trick with using a C major 7 sharp 11 to go to the next section. But let's just start at the beginning. The F minor 7 is still the same voicing. And then I'm adding a B7 as a passing chord to get to the B flat minor 7. And essentially that's of course just a tritone substitution. And notice that I'm using the larger B flat minor 7 voicing. And that's because then I can add some inner voice movement to take me to E flat 7. The E flat 7 gets a flat 5 leading note to move to A flat major 7. And then of course the A flat major 7 I'm keeping exactly the same. And then the D flat major 7, so first it's just the basic D flat major 7. And then I'm adding some inner voice movement, taking it down to a D flat major 6. And that works as inner voice movement, but also as a way to get to the G7 chord, because the C and the B flat becomes an enclosure around the 3rd of G7, like this. And here I'm using that larger version as well, stretching up to the B here, and then down to the C major 7. And here again you have this movement from the major 7 down to the major 6, but I'm adding a bit of rhythm and also a chromatic note. And then I turn this into a C major 7 sharp 11 like this, because then I can sort of shift the upper part of the chord down to go to the C minor 11. All of these small moves and extra chords add motion and color, but they only work because the foundation is clear and easy to play. One of the most important skills that you can develop for both comping and chord melody is the ability to think in flexible chords. You want to be able to easily add the melody on top without having to know 1,000 inversions. And in this video, I break down a system for that. And this is also how Joe Pass thinks about chords. And it's an incredibly powerful approach when you're creating your own arrangements. Check it out, learn jazz, make music.